What are the issues keeping CEOs awake at night? And how can business leaders help shape a more sustainable world that works for us all? I'm Halla Mohieddeen. Welcome to Global Perspectives from KPMG. The centre of European and global politics for 3 decades, serving as a Prime Minister in Denmark, the country's Minister of Economic Affairs, and later the Secretary General of NATO. Today, he leads an international consultancy offering advice to CEOs and other global leaders on geopolitics, international security, and emerging markets. I'm delighted to welcome Anders Fogh Rasmussen to this month's episode. Anders, thanks for joining us on Global Perspectives. Now, your career reads like something from the movies. I'd imagine your insight and experience is being called on a lot at the moment. For the first time in many years, we're in the grip of a major armed conflict at the heart of Europe. What's your view on the impact that's having on the wider world and general instability right now?
The current war in Ukraine has and will have a major impact, not only on the European continent, but also on the global world order, so to speak. Obviously, in Europe, we are witnessing human suffering. 8 million Ukrainians are now refugees. We see an unprecedented destruction of civilian infrastructure in Ukraine, and globally, it will have an impact on the world order as we know it. Putin's goal is to disrupt the current world order. So if he succeeds in Ukraine, he won't stop in Ukraine. He will continue. And if he gets success in Ukraine, we will have a new, more brutal world order where it is the rule of the ruthless and not the rule of law that will govern the world. So it will have a major impact, not only in Europe, but globally.
Well, I touched earlier on your consultancy firm, Rasmussen Global. Given the great uncertainty facing the planet right now, are you finding increasing demand from CEOs and other business leaders seeking more strategic advice on how to shape their growth plans?
We see really an increasing demand for geopolitical analysis and advice. For centuries, business leaders were used to a world where geopolitics was just a sideshow, nothing that would not have a major impact on the bottom line. Not anymore. On the contrary, many companies discovered how difficult it was to deal with Russia. After the Russian invasion of Ukraine, many of them left Russia abruptly and suffered a lot of losses economically and in other respects. Equally important, we will see the same development in China. We will see increased tensions between China and the United States. We have already seen the United States introduce sanctions on the export of high technology from American companies to China. That will be followed up with similar restrictions on the European export of high-tech to China. And to navigate in those troubled waters, so to speak, really demands a deep geopolitical understanding to avoid future losses and to find alternatives to the current location of companies. A lot of companies are reviewing their supply lines, they're diversifying, and all that together demands a geopolitical analysis, geopolitical advice. Jokingly, I used to say that in today's world, each major multinational company needs a foreign minister, so to speak, or at least geopolitical advice. So in my company, Rasmussen Global, that provides such geopolitical advice, we have really seen an increasing demand for that analysis in recent years.
Now, you're a strong advocate for closer ties between advanced democracies and greater cross-border cooperation. What advice do you have for CEOs who are perhaps reluctant to explore global trade, given the uncertainty right now?
I think we are approaching a new world order with two camps, an autocratic camp and an democratic camp. And in between, of course, you have a gray zone. You have a non-aligned democracy like India. You have non-aligned autocracies like the countries in the Gulf region and Middle East. But basically, you will have a world order with two camps, an autocratic camp and a democratic camp. And my advice to CEOs would be to really think through carefully how to deal with those two camps. As a point of departure, it will be very, very challenging to be too closely connected to the autocratic camp. So I foresee that globalization will change its face. Overall, you will see less economic interaction between the democratic camp and the autocratic camp. In exchange, I foresee more economic interaction within the democratic camp. I think we will see more free trade agreements, we will see more investments agreements, more exchange of technology among the countries in the democratic camp. So you will still have globalization, but it will change its face. And the thing is of utmost importance that all business leaders realize how important this new world order will be for their company. I think many companies have been burnt in the past because as long as they get along with the autocratic leaders, they can make good business in autocratic countries. But as soon as they get into a conflict with the autocratic leaders, they will be faced with a lot of problems. And at home, they will have problems dealing with how to handle sanctions and all that stuff. So my main advice to CEOs would be to look closer into this and diversify, focus much more on economic interaction within the democratic camp.
Anders Fogh Rasmussen, thanks for joining us on Global Perspectives. Well, we're joined now by John McCalla-Leacy, Head of Global ESG at KPMG. John, thanks for joining us on Global Perspectives. We've just been hearing from Anders Fogh Rasmussen on the deep uncertainty facing the planet right now and the need for cross-border collaboration. I'd imagine that echoes a lot of what you're discussing with clients and the wider world right now.
Halla, yes, that's absolutely consistent with the discussions that we're having with clients and others right now. And, many of the challenges that we are seeing are simply too deep-seated and too difficult to tackle alone. Complex problems require complex solutions, and achieving this means bringing together the very best talent, the brightest minds with diverse experience and perspectives, bringing them all together to shape well-formed and inclusive solutions that will be effective in their application. So we at KPMG, we do all we can to connect, to convene, and also to collaborate with many groups. And there are many groups that are doing exactly the same thing right now. This is both in terms of driving alignment, such as through industry groups and within sector collaboration, but also driving innovation through collaboration with groups who may not normally interact and work together on a regular basis, if at all. And there are so many, there's so many examples, and I haven't got a huge amount of time, there's so many examples of these groups right across the world collaborating and driving industry and in-sector alignment. And groups such as GFANZ, that's the Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero, which brings together leading net zero initiatives across financial services to accelerate the transition to net zero. Or the Consumer Goods Forum, with its 400 members operating across 70 countries. Now, they've got combined revenues of $4.6 trillion, and they're working together to support businesses in the implementation of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And there's the C40, which is incredibly importantly a global network working with nearly 100 mayors of the world's leading cities, with approximately 2,000 city officials who are directly responsible for supporting 600 million residents, representing about 20% of global GDP. And they're all working together to confront the climate crisis. And there are many, many more that I could name. But there are risks associated with collaboration on that. I want to be really clear on that. So, for example, in the US, lawmakers have raised concerns that the Net Zero Insurance Alliance, which focuses on decarbonizing insurance and reinsurance, here lawmakers believe that this collaboration may violate US antitrust laws. There are also risks on protectionism resulting from new government incentives being implemented to increase onshore and nearshore delivery of the green transition. However, considering the scale of the transition to a low carbon economy, which I might add, the force for good estimated as costing around $275 trillion between the period 2020 to 2050. Considering this scale, which is most likely to be the biggest transformational change program the world has ever seen. So when you consider this and the inherent complexity that I referred to earlier, we shouldn't be surprised that there are execution challenges and risks to overcome. But most importantly, we do understand that we will only be successful through collaboration and working together.
Now, I know you recently took the global role after a successful stint leading on ESG in the UK. You've spoken a lot about your own background and how the support and opportunities you were given really shaped your life and passions. How important is it for you that business leaders tackle the social or S part of ESG?
In short, it is critically important. And to be clear, there will be no successful, long-term, sustainable transition which works for all communities without a strong focus on the S. The S is correctly positioned in the center, or I often say at the heart of the ESG construct. It considers many topics such as workforce and skills of the future, inclusion, diversity, quality, equity, health and safety, and inclusive design, just to name but a few. And the S is precisely the reason why action on climate, on biodiversity, and within our corporate organizations is so very important. Collectively, when you look at action on the E and the G, it's about sustaining an environment where we can all live and flourish. Or to put it another way, action on the E and the G is for the benefit of the S. And I would add that successful, long-term and sustainable outcomes can only be achieved through the S. So what do I mean by that? As I mentioned earlier, complex problems require complex solutions, and it will only be achieved through bringing the best talent together. This means the best talent from academia and industry, from developed and the developing worlds, which I would add is important to ensure a just transition which works for the benefit of all communities. It also means ensuring adequate input, challenge and representation across all protected characteristics, including gender, age, social mobility, ethnicity, disability, sexual orientation, and more. Now, this approach of embracing diverse talent, of bringing the best and the brightest minds together, will enable us to drive inclusive, innovative solutions which solve some of humanity's biggest challenges. I really like this. I was at an event not so long ago, and the client put this perfectly when he said that, John, diverse teams ask better questions, but inclusive teams, well, they find better solutions. So, there's so much evidence out there to support this. And for example, we work with a company called Auticon. So they're a provider of autistic consultants in the workplace. Now, autistic consultants, they bring cognitive diversity and new perspectives. They can be incredibly strong in areas such as maths, physics, and IT, outperforming non-autistic people in pattern recognition, in error identification, quality assurance, and testing. A recent study by JP Morgan actually showed that autistic resources completed tasks in a queue between 90 to 140% more productively than non-autistic people. Another study also showed, if I switch to gender, that boards which are gender diverse are 2 times more likely to develop decarbonisation strategies. They're 25% more likely to have medium and long-term greenhouse gas reduction targets, and they're also more likely to allocate future capital aligned to these targets. And considering the need to attract talent, a recent KPMG survey showed that 1 in 3 of current 18 to 24-year-olds have rejected job offers based on the company's ESG record, including companies focused on the S of ESG. I would also add that there's a strong consideration here regarding staff retention. So considering the S is the right thing to do for society. It also makes business sense in driving productivity, ensuring that we manage attraction and retention of staff. And the S will ultimately be the recipient and the enabler of change to a just and low carbon economy.
Now, KPMG is placing a big emphasis right now on ESG, given the uncertainty facing the political and economic world. What advice do you have for CEOs who might be considering pulling back on their commitments and investments in the ESG space?
Well, Halla, as a global head of ESG, I'm sure you won't be surprised with me saying that they certainly should not pull back on their commitments. My advice would be to not be put off by some of the negative recent comments regarding, for example, the term ESG, but instead for them to focus on the substance, the actions within ESG to mitigate risk and to drive value. So we see, don't we, that CEOs are making net zero commitments for 2025, 2030, 2040, and even 2050. But the impact of regulations such as the EU's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM for short, is set to increase operating costs over the next decade. So what does this mean? If your net zero plan doesn't account for decarbonisation, your business model will become unviable. It will erode enterprise value and damage the core economics of your business. If you're a CEO, you need to be thinking about how I add value through my just transition to a net zero, not erode it. Now, there are ESG value creation opportunities and risks for every business function, and CEOs need to know and understand them all. They need to prioritize them and act now. So I'll give you another example. CSRD, which is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. Now, this came into force in January of 2023 and represents a significant expansion of mandatory sustainability reporting. And it requires disclosures across the environment, the E, social, the S, and governance, the G. So they need disclosures across all those indicators. And this will impact tens of thousands of companies over the coming years in the EU, but also across the globe. Those companies with material operations in the EU will be impacted also. And we know, don't we, that the SEC disclosure requirements are also due to be agreed upon for the US, and that will also come through. And there are a number of new requirements expected right across the globe. So I'd ask CEOs, when was the last time they overhauled every single business function or business unit? And how long did that take? 2030 is just around the corner. And when we consider the regulatory landscape that I just talked about, but also broader topics such as changing consumer behaviors, employee expectations, the direction of travel is clear. Change is coming. So in summary, my advice is not to put off till tomorrow that which should be urgently progressed today, but instead CEOs should hold their nerve in doing what's right over the long term.
John McCalla-Leacy, thanks for joining us on Global Perspectives. I'm Halla Mohieddeen. Thanks for joining us this month. We'll be back again soon with another edition of Global Perspectives. In the meantime, you can listen to all of KPMG International's podcasts by searching for KPMG on your podcast platform of choice or by heading to kpmg.com.